Hi there, everyone. Hopefully, you guys can all hear me. So we are doing a Facebook Live session here, 45 minutes Q&A. I am Matt Laye, one of the Sharman Ultra coaches, or as it's listed there, Dr. Matt Laye, PhD. And uh, my other position is as a uh, faculty member at the College of Idaho here, right there. And yeah, and so I am interested in your guys' questions, and I'm going to have to find where those questions are going right there. We have one comment already, which, how do we find that? Um, so let's see. Comments here. Live. And where are those comments? So, hi all. Hopefully you guys can see that. And sorry, the new format on this Facebook Live event is interesting. So I'm trying to find where I can actually see your guys' comments. So I know they're there. I can see that there are 4 of them. So what are the questions? See if I can actually figure this out. This new form here. And questions. Where are those comments? I know there's at least a few people tuning in. All right, I'm going to start with a few questions that were emailed. And I'm going to pull up those questions. Sorry, all. I don't know where the comments thing is here, but yeah. So some of the questions asked via email are what are the effects of coronavirus on sort of daily running and racing life here in Idaho? So I'm located in Boise, Idaho, which has been not one of the better spots to be in the country in terms of coronavirus cases. And how have I kept my runners motivated all over the world without as many race options? So first off, in Idaho, we're allowed to exercise outside, so being able to do that has been great. So staying fit and staying active has actually been an important part of sort of the quarantine and the isolation that comes with the quarantine. So that's been very, very valuable. And having access to trails and having access to the outdoors and being in a less densely populated state is helpful in that regard. So many times this summer we were able to travel up to the mountains and not really see a whole lot of people on trails or elsewhere. So that's been very, very useful. Some other things, in terms of keeping motivated, I think that one of the things that you can really stay motivated with is thinking about the process of training rather than having this sort of goal, this end goal of going out and doing a race, trying to set a personal best, something that can be a little bit more intrinsic and even local. Some of my athletes have said things like, I realized that I actually don't really need races to get fulfillment out of my running. And it's the process of the training itself that leads to the most fulfillment. So that's been really insightful for me as a coach to see that this has been an opportunity for some athletes to reanalyze their relationship with running and what a race means to them. There's been others that have done things that they've wanted to do that are not really conducive to the sort of normal way we go about training and racing. So, for instance, one athlete trying to run 100 miles on their own with their own sort of support band with loops, and that was just a goal of theirs. Nothing to do with, again, a specific course, a specific race, or anything like that. And then other athletes actually going for sort of those FKT type routes or those routes that have been established in their area. So I think that the motivation that the athletes I've coached have had, it really varies, and it's actually a good time to sort of find that that motivation find that motivation within people. So that's one question. I see a question from Dean, although I can't see it here, but I am hoping to see it. I can see it from an email. Dean asked, what was your comment on protein supplementation versus supplement versus food debate on Twitter, and the significance of it in difference? So one of the courses I taught this last fall was applied nutrition at the College of Idaho. And one of the debates that we had, and I like to set up these debates in this course was on whether or not protein supplements were necessary or superior to just, say, whole food, regular food type things in terms of protein intake. And the idea being that protein supplements are sort of this refined way of getting protein, where you've actually broken down a lot of protein and maybe it's absorbed faster than, say, normal real food. And is that actually necessary? And so I was asking Twitterverse whether or not they felt that was the case, and sort of giving some feedback to my students as to what other people thought as they were debating this very same topic. And so the end result of that debate was that there are certain times and certain athletes who might benefit from protein supplements, but if you can, food is just as good of a way to get protein. Real food is just as good of a way to get protein as, say, a protein powder or a protein supplement. Now, most runners are not looking to gain weight, and sometimes protein supplements can be helpful for those who cannot really consume as much, say, whole food protein in a day. So for runners, maybe not as important, but the convenience was, I think, the number one argument that swayed sort of the pro-protein supplement group, was that it's just easier to get protein that way. It's certainly more expensive, but it is definitely easier as well. All right, another question I'm seeing here is, we have on 4-hour plus training runs, do you have your athletes take protein after 3 or 4 hours on the run? Thanks. This is not a necessary thing that has to happen. I certainly think that having some protein in recovery is very important, but mainly what athletes should be taking is some sort of carbohydrate source of energy during an extended long run that's 3 or 4 hours. And the reason is this is actually sort of protein related. So if we think about our carbohydrate stores, and after 3 or 4 hours, we might be depleting them quite significantly to the point where we can no longer rely on the carbohydrate stores we had beforehand to supply energy. That doesn't mean we're going to stop using carbohydrate for energy. We still actually want to use carbohydrate for energy. It's a more efficient energy source. in terms of it requires less oxygen to get the same amount of ATP out of it. And so what happens is the body starts to break down protein. And through a process called the glucose alanine cycle, we can make new glucose, new carbohydrate in the liver by breaking down protein, specifically the amino acid alanine. And so that will lead to protein degradation. So if we take carbohydrate supplements or take carbohydrate during a long run, what happens is that that protein degradation will get delayed and hopefully stop. And so we won't be breaking down as much protein as much. Now, when we stop exercising and we maybe take a protein supplement post-exercise for recovery, that's going to shut down that protein degradation process even faster, quicker, more potently, so that we're really not going to break down muscle anymore. And we'll start to switch that process from one that is catabolic, meaning breaking down, to one that is anabolic, meaning a process that is building up. So we'll be building back up protein and making more protein, hopefully. So hopefully that answers that question for longer runs and protein supplements. So I don't consider them necessary. If you have a little in there, it might be beneficial. Let's see. Some other questions. Should runners lift heavy weights, and how often should they do this to help with their running specifically? This is actually a really interesting question. I was listening to a podcast about this earlier this week, and what they were discussing was pretty interesting in the fact that the way I learned to lift weights as a runner was 3 sets of 12, bicep curls or rows or squats or something like that. And that was sort of the standard way of lifting, and it's sort of the standard recommendation for resistance training for general health. But the thing about that protocol is that's actually a hypertrophy or muscle building protocol. The sort of lighter weight, longer reps, that especially that 8 to 12 range, that is what will lead you to develop bigger muscles, for lack of a better word. And that's not necessarily what we as runners want, right? We want to be stronger for sure, but we don't necessarily want to be bigger. We want our strength to weight ratio to improve. So we want to increase the strength without necessarily increasing the weight. And therefore, the best way to actually accomplish this is through heavy lifting. That seems counterintuitive. You think you would get more hypertrophy with heavy lifting, but that's not actually the case. So a lot of these lifting protocols that are, say, 3 sets of 5, 5 sets of 5, things like that, and that might be whole body lifts, maybe Olympic lifts, squats, deadlifts, single leg or split squats, those sorts of lifts are going to be most beneficial for gaining strength without gaining muscle mass, which is really one of the goals. And so heavy lifting is extremely beneficial. And some of the benefits beyond just getting stronger is it improves running economy. And running economy is sort of the forgotten running performance variable. We often think about VO2 max, and we think about we also think about VO2 max, and we think about lactate threshold as being the two most important running variables, and they are very important, but running economy matters just as much, because running economy is being able to do the same amount of work with less energy needed, so you become more economical. And resistance training, especially heavy lifting, does that. So that can be very beneficial. I would say doing that 2 to 3 times a week, preferably either after your hard runs or even on your easier days are the best days. Just the only time that would not be beneficial would be probably before your harder runs. Or if you're doing it, say, the night before a harder run and it's affecting your interval workout or your tempo run or whatever, then that might not be the ideal time to do it either. So heavy weights. Another question that I see from before is there was a study on telomere length benefits for older ultra runners. And what are my thoughts on 60 plus year older runners and how I just adjust training for them? So, an older, the telomeres are these protein caps that sit at the end of our chromosomes or DNA in our cells. And what happens is every time a cell divides, so this first little basic info here, every time the cell divides, the telomere gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And one of the theories of aging is that we start to show stages of aging because these telomeres become too short. We start to see DNA damage and things like that. And so there's some evidence that exercise itself can protect those telomeres and maintain their telomere length. And that would therefore slow aging, is at least the theory. And so there does seem to be some benefits on this. And I've done a study looking at marathon runners who did one marathon per day for 7 straight days. And we found that some of the proteins that are involved in that cap of the telomere tended to get upregulated, and you had more of those proteins after that intense sort of exercise. Maybe not intense, but certainly a lot of exercise in 7 days. And other studies have shown cross-sectionally that people who are active tend to have longer telomeres. And we know that people who are active have less age-related chronic diseases as well. So it all sort of aligns. And why exercise is so powerful in being anti-aging, not necessarily sure the exact way, the exact thing that's going on, but that is one of the potential ways that aging is being prevented with exercise. So, trying to see these comments here. Some other questions we have. Do you prescribe HIIT protocols for your athletes, and where in the program? What type of athletes? 30-second wind gates. This was related to, I guess, a Twitter post of mine as well. So HIIT stands for high intensity interval training. And in the last 10 years or so, this has been shown to be a very effective and time-efficient way to train for both cardiorespiratory fitness, so your sort of aerobic system, but also increasing the mitochondria in your skeletal muscle, and having some sort of traditional benefits from training in a much shorter period of time. And what a training protocol like this might look like is the classical studies that were done showing 30 seconds all out as far as an interval, 30 seconds Wingate test, and then that test would then be repeated 6 times with as much recovery as you wanted in between. Variations of this have arisen where it's maybe 1 minute on, 1 minute off, but this is just interval training. And it's just a very hard session of interval training, which is super useful. And so, yeah, I prescribe this for ultra athletes as well. This again is another thing that's also going to increase your running autonomy. It's a way to get a lot of sort of adaptation from the cardiovascular and metabolic standpoint in a short period of time. So especially those who are time crunched, this can be a really effective workout. And there's all sorts of variations you can do on this, anywhere from increasing the interval length, going 15, 30, 45 seconds. There's a classic workout that cyclists have done that's in a workload of 2 to 1. So you would do, say, 40 seconds hard, 20 seconds off, maybe do that 8 to 12 times, and then rest for a block of period of time, and perhaps repeat that 2 or 3 more times as a really, really, really hard workout. And that's been shown to be sort of effective along these same lines as well. So yeah, HIIT studies are super important, super beneficial, and I think that they have a real value in any training program, even if you're planning on running, say, 100 miles. Um, so some of the other questions here are, all right. Nutrition adjustments when racing at a higher elevation. Often I have a late to post-race headache for a couple of hours. So that's what Maddie's asking. Those nutritional adjustments, often what you need to do is sort of reduce the number of calories. So our GI becomes more sensitive at altitude. And so that's one of the adjustments that could be made at a higher elevation, is just figuring out what you can actually take in from the GI system. Hi.
Oh.
And what actually works so that you're not having sort of those GI issues that are common among ultra runners, especially later in the races. So this is very typical COVID-19 work environments. You know, this is how I've been all semester working with the kids in class, and both of us working from home. So yeah, this is Bridget, my lovely wife. So that's one thing I would consider, is what you're actually taking. And when you think about what you're eating, there's this new sort of dietary paradigm that I recommend Googling called the FODMAP, FODMAP. And it's a certain diet that reduces the amount of certain carbohydrates specifically that when digested, they tend to give GI distress. And so you can implement a sort of low FODMAP diet prior to altitude, maybe a few days before, and then have your sort of race nutrition as normal, paying specific attention to things like fructose, which are known to really disrupt the GI system. So that is one recommendation, is going to sort of this low FODMAP diet, and I'm happy to direct you in the direction of any of that information of what would be considered a low FODMAP diet, if you need any help, Maddie. So hopefully that answers your question. Rookie, or Jason Carlbeck, asks about the Sidekick muscle scraper called the Curve, got mainly for his calves. Think about it as a training tool. I don't actually know I'm not familiar with the Curve, but I do think that manual manipulation of like muscle, so muscle massage, things like that, are super useful as a way to stay healthy. And that could be more of a proactive type approach. So even before you get an injury, having work done on a regular basis to sort of identify maybe deeper tissue spots that are locked up, or there's some adhesions, in which manual manipulation can help. Whether the Curve helps with that, I'm not sure. I know that foam rolling can help in certain spots, but doesn't help everywhere. And therefore, having somebody actually go in with their hands, dig around, and figure out where the fascia is not moving correctly could be a useful thing as well. It's certainly something we recommend for all of our clients, is to try to get a semi-regular massage. I would say that's once a month, if you can afford it. Even more frequently, once every other week, things like that. So, Adrian asks, I've been working with the coach to develop a custom training program to improve 100-mile times and avoid injury. Full-time coach is a big jump in cost. How might I benefit from that? And can I keep repeating my program, or do I need to keep getting new programs to avoid a plateau? The biggest benefit you get from a coach is really that individualized training plan and that constant communication that can lead to accountability. And that way, if you if your life situation changes, if something does not go perfectly, so you can have everything written out for the next 6 months as the perfect build up for a 100-mile race. And you may be that lucky person who every one of those things works perfectly. You know exactly why you're doing it. you're getting the most benefit from everything, and that's great, right? Then maybe you don't need a coach. But a coach can come in there and tell you, what do you need to focus on that specific run? It's one thing to see 30 miles on the training log for that weekend, but it's another to be told you need to find a route that mimics the race specifically. You should really practice this the first third, this the middle third, this the last third, right? That might not all come across if it just says 30 miles. The other thing a coach can provide is when those things that do come up, say COVID, say, family things, issues, travel, how do you work around those? How do you adjust your training plan to make that fit? Because it's not just about the training that really leads to the overall adaptation to a training program, but it's about your entire life stresses that sort of compound upon that physical stress of the training. So we can't just look at it in isolation and say, it's only the physical training. If you have a terrible week of work, 12 hours a day, you're not going to be at your peak mileage that week as well. And unless you can see 4 or 5 months in the future in that plan, you're not necessarily going to see that. So I think that a coach provides that individualization, can provide that perspective, and sometimes the mental capacity that it takes to say, go out and do the thing, or even if I know what to do myself, knowing what I probably should do, I would rather have somebody just tell me what to do many times, so that I don't have to put out the mental energy to think through what I'm going to do and plan it and organize it. Otherwise, if it's just on the schedule, I know what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and coach can help you identify which of those workouts are the focus ones, which ones can maybe be modified, which are the most important, etc. I hope that answers your question, Adrian. Oh, one other question. Do you want to keep repeating the program, or do you need to keep getting new programs to avoid a plateau? The body adapts to new stimulus. If you keep doing the same stimulus over and over and over again, it'll eventually adapt and it will plateau. So if the training plan looks identical, then you're probably going to be reaching some sort of plateau. So mixing it up. Maybe you're training for speed for a month or two. Maybe trying a different approach to the way you stack long runs together. Maybe having 1 week that's very highly intense and then backing off 1 week, going 1 week up, 1 week down instead of 2 weeks or whatever. But doing something different will likely yield some sort of novel stimulus. It doesn't have to be dramatic. And even the training plan you might have, you might only adapt a few weeks here, a couple workouts here, and that might be sufficient to get you over that plateau. But there should be some sort of novelty to the training plan that forces your body to adapt in a new way. Now, granted, all that's very important, the novelty aspect and having some sort of new training plan or new approach, but the most important thing is just the consistency. So if I was to say, what would I rather have you do? Like some new training, or be consistent and do the same training over and over, if I knew that was going to keep you healthy, I'd say do this same training over and over, and that consistency will itself build on itself over and over and over again. I like to think of that as you're continually making deposits into your investment, and the compounding interest will keep compounding, hopefully compounding. You may see diminishing returns, but hopefully you're still going to see some of that compounding interest in the terms of fitness being gained. Hopefully that answers your question, Adrian. Let's see, other questions. David, you had a question that I didn't see. There are other questions here. Um, not seeing them come up. Any other questions you guys have? Ah, here we go. We modified client training during the pandemic. Yeah, so the main way I've modified this is really to reevaluate what the goals are, and to really adjust, say, expectations for what we're doing in a training wise. And so a lot of that is actually backing off that sort of thin edge line of sort of approaching our maximal ability for training. And instead, it's sort of identifying, okay, what can we do that's going to give us a bump in overall improvement in fitness, but is going to say keep us from getting injured as well. So we want to back it off a little bit, but still maintain, some periods of higher stress along with that typical recovery period as well. And so that's, I think, the main difference that I've looked at in terms of training athletes during COVID without any specific goal. A lot of it is focused on just becoming a better overall runner, all around runner. So maybe doing more speed work than someone who is typically doing 100 miles or stage races is used to doing, and focusing on some shorter stuff to just make them a better, faster, hopefully more economical runner. So that's one of the differences. Common go-to workouts for ultra runners. Um, I have a couple that I like. One of the things I like to do is to rotate my long runs so that on one week we may have just a standard steady state normal long run, and on the next long run I may include a period of at the end of the long run, say 3 to 5, 6 miles, that is going to be faster or at about marathon pace. And this does a couple things. It helps us finish fast for these long runs, helps our body to remember how to run fast at the end of an ultra. It also does. It also keeps us from going too fast at the beginning of that long run, which is beneficial as well. So trying to make sure that the athlete is not overdoing it at the beginning of their long run. So I may rotate between, just a normal long run and that sort of specialized long run that has some speed workout in it, say from week to week. Another one of my favorite sort of taper workouts or beginning workouts for athletes, say in their first couple weeks of starting with me, to sort of get a feel for pacing, see how good an athlete is at pacing, and to sort of hit the different paces, is a workout I call 6-5-4-3-2-1. And that is 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, with 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 rest. So sort of the interval length minus 1 minute rest. And what this does is you start at, say, half marathon pace and work your way down to mile pace or even a little bit faster. And so you're hitting a bunch of different speeds. You're hopefully recruiting all of your muscle fibers. And if you're doing it right, you're getting a good feel for pacing, which is the most important thing. Because on the trail, so often we don't have good accurate measure based on how fast we're going in terms of how much effort that really is. So by being able to sort of internally gauge what an effort is like, that's really beneficial for the athlete. So trying to prescribe workouts in which they're trying to either shift efforts in the middle of intervals is something I often do, or shift different intervals may have different efforts through the workouts. So I like to do some of the other workouts I like to do are, say, 2 mile repeats that either finish fast or start fast and sort of settle into a tempo type effort afterwards. So that would be another example of a workout that I like, and basing those sort of on perceived effort. At what point do I limit the long run durations? It depends on the intensity of the run and the spot that the athlete is starting from. So if you're an athlete looking to do a 100-mile race, like a 6-hour long run, should be not outside of something that you can do, whether that's as a race, or as part of a race, a 50K or 50 miler that's even longer than 6 hours. That might be more suitable. And it will depend on sort of the effort and how far you can go in that 6 hours. Maybe you're taking walking breaks, or maybe it is half walking, and therefore 6 hours is not necessarily going to be as stressful as, say, running at 8-minute pace for 6 hours, something like that. So it depends on the athlete. I'm not afraid to prescribe stuff that would be that sort of long. Any other questions that people have? The whole Facebook Live, Teams, Zoom thing has been a work in progress since a year ago, so it feels more natural, but it's still a challenge. I'll try something here. I do think those backyard events are going to continue. I think that people are going to be craving for some sort of competition, some way to test themselves, and let's see if that works. Some way to test themselves, and some way to really see if they are their training is working. I think that those backyard races are, I'm not all that intrigued by them, but I can see the usefulness from a perspective of an athlete who needs something to train for, and some way to test their limit. It's certainly a very pure way of testing limits, because you're seeing against yourself how far can you go. And some of my athletes, their limits that they want to test are indeed how far they can go, how long they can go, rather than say how fast they can cover a certain distance. So I do think that they're going to continue, and they'll find a spot for people. And I think what will be interesting is if those can eventually be done live, what those will look like again live, and whether or not they sort of succeed in that environment as well. Let's see. Athletes who put a lot of work into FKTs burn out when racing comes back. I'd say that if the FKTs are spaced properly, Sean's asking about whether training for FKTs may perhaps result in a burnout by athletes. I don't necessarily think so, as long as they're spaced, just like say a racing season would be designed. And so I think it's important that you design your FKT attempts and approach in the same way you would structure, say, training for a season or a year. Making sure that there's appropriate downtime in between FKT attempts, making sure that you have sort of a taper if this is an A FKT or a B FKT, or depending on what sort of dedication you're willing to commit to that FKT. And if you do that, then I don't necessarily see any negative consequences when racing resumes. Yeah, it can be a good break to do something different. Yeah, so Ellie's asking about an athlete who regularly vomits at a 100-mile event, but only once they get to the 100K event, 100K mark. Yeah, so it's one of those things where you can't train for the last, say, you know 40 miles of a 100 miler on a consistent basis. You're not often doing 70-mile training runs, so it's hard to anticipate and train for those things that occur beyond that, say, 100K mark. I think the advice I would give is similar to what I've given before, is maybe uh, toy with a low FODMAP diet, which is low in sort of the fermentable carbohydrates that can cause um, nausea and can be a source of vomiting. Another thing could be that pacing is off, so that the efforts are too high early, and that could be a source of GI distress. That's another reason why people get GI distress. Or heat could be an issue, and the heat combined with a pace that's maybe unrealistic could lead to sort of that nausea and potentially vomiting as well. So I would say, yeah, that fueling, you want to maximize your calories in, yes, but it needs to be balanced. And so perhaps this athlete should try fueling a little less aggressively early, and that might lead to less GI distress later in a 100-mile race. Jason asked whether what my thoughts on were the 24-hour distance record on the track, and that Kilian Jornet tried and failed, I think, after 10 hours. First, I think it's just incredible that Kilian even decided to do this sort of event that seems so outside of his comfort zone. And I think that we can learn a lot from just sort of that mindset that he took to doing this. Is that he took something that, you know, he knows he's probably the best in the world in 100-mile mountainous races, really hard races, and then to go from that to, say, 24 hours on the track, which he's not necessarily been training for, and does not have a track record, pun intended, so to speak. I think that that's incredibly insightful as to what type of athlete Kilian is. He's willing to take on these challenges that maybe he is not necessarily, best prepared for, but that he will prepare for seriously and take an attempt at it. That being said, the 24-hour distance record on the track is very, very impressive. I don't remember the exact number, and it's something that that I think by showing that Kilian was unsuccessful in it, that it is a stout record that will take a lot of dedication by perhaps an athlete that's specifically, trained for that type of event, and therefore they're going to be better suited towards that event rather than someone who is used to doing just mountainous 100 miles. So that's what I sort of think about the 24-hour distance record on track. You gonna take a go at that, Jason? Seems like something you might want to do. All right. Well, we're at 45 minutes. I want to apologize for everyone for having a couple of technical glitches there, And if you guys have any more questions, feel free to reach out. This is the last video series for the Sharman Ultra coaches. The previous ones have been recorded, and you can find them on the Sharman Ultra Facebook page. So you can see Ellie and Ian and Liza and Sean all talk about their training as well. And I wish everyone a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and best of luck training in 2021. Hopefully you will all be able to race a bit more than you have in 2020. So thank you, everyone.